you tell me about the legal flip-flopping that's impacting efforts to police the Texas border?
Generally speaking, under U.S. law, it's the federal government that's responsible for immigration policy and for enforcing immigration laws. What Texas has done is passed its own law to restrict the ability of people to enter the state illegally and to be able to arrest them and transport them out of the state. Now, this is something that generally is reserved as a power for the federal government, not for the state government. This is why the Justice Department is looking to stop this from happening, and a court case is ongoing. Just the other day, the U.S. Supreme Court weighed in and did not stop Texas's law from being enforced. They said essentially that because Texas's law is a temporary emergency measure, it might be something that needs to work its way through the court system slowly, and with it being empowered to be carried out in the meantime. So this is the big dispute on whether Texas can implement its own laws to protect its citizens from illegal migrants, or whether they have to wait for the Biden administration to actually do something.
How much anger is there among ordinary Americans about the migrant issue?
There's anger on some parts, but there's concern on the parts of a lot more Americans, because this is not just something that affects the southern states. Migrants are being shipped throughout the country, in northern states, in remote areas of different states. And the problem isn't about welcoming in new people. The problem is states just don't have the resources. When you have an influx of whether it's 40 or 50 people in a very small community, you now need to provide housing, you need to provide additional schooling, you need to provide services, and many places are stretched thin because the economy in some states has not been terrific in the last 4 years. So this is a concern for many Americans because they're seeing this influx of migrants, many of whom don't have their proper history checked. We don't know their criminal status. We don't know who they are, or where they come from, and they're taxing our resources essentially without our ability to pay for their needs. This is very concerning to a lot of Americans, not just on the border states, but through all the country, and it's an election year issue.
Well, indeed, of course, the figures are quite astonishing, aren't they? 3.5 million people entered the United States illegally last year. Some would say this is just the country has lost control of its borders. Others are suggesting that it's by design on the part of the government and President Joe Biden. What's your view?
I think that there could be a very good argument that, on the one hand, immigration has always been coming steadily over the southern border. The numbers now are just higher than usual, reflecting in part instability in the southern hemisphere and in other parts of the world. Remember, migrants are not just coming from Mexico; they're traveling from China, from Afghanistan, from the Middle East, from Africa to reach America. And in part, it is by design. It is a design of the Democrats to not actually enforce border control policies. There was enforcement during the Trump administration. It could very easily have continued during the Biden years. However, President Biden dismantled many of the policies that President Trump had in place, including requiring people seeking asylum to remain in Mexico until their cases were heard. So it's confusing and puzzling why there has been less enforcement on the part of the Biden administration. It's easy to ascribe ulterior motives to this, perhaps for future voters to actually participate in Democratic elections and not Republican ones. But ultimately, the issue has grown out of control, and the lack of enforcement of current laws is problematic.